Sam Fender is back with his third studio album, People Watching, and this is a bit of a strange one for me because in my head, I still see Sam Fender as a bit of a newcomer in the new wave of indie rock from England. But he's not that new anymore. We're here now. Third album is where a lot of artists really master their craft and a lot of people class it as their best work. But has Sam achieved this with People Watching?
Well, he spent a long time crafting this project. The last time we got something was 17 Going Under, which was in 2021. So it's been 4 years since we've had any music from him directly. So whether this will be good or not, I guess we're going to find out.
So should we jump into the first track, which surprisingly is the title track in People Watching? Pretty rare that I see that. It was also one of the singles, and to be honest, when I heard it as a single, I thought, nah, it's kind of boring, doesn't, excite me too much. But having re-listened to it a few times, I've seen it live as well, I've actually kind of come around to this song. I think there's a lot of elements in there. It's quite a long song, but I really kind of got to like it. So I'm interested to hear what you thought.
It felt like something that I'd heard many times before. I don't know how quite to put that into words, but the style of the song and the kind of content of it really felt reminiscent of a lot of other songs that I'd previously heard.
It's very Americanized to me, very Killers, Springsteen-esque. I think the best element of this song was kind of the latter half where we started getting the trumpets, etc. coming in there. But I did enjoy it, but I know what you mean. It feels familiar for some reason.
It's very generic, but I can't deny that it is super catchy. It does hit the mark in what it needs to do, but for me it just felt very safe and very normal. But we'll move off that onto Nostalgia's Lie, which was another quite long track, and this album is full of them. 11 tracks. It's nearly 50 minutes long, so every track has got a runtime of 5 minutes.
I did actually quite like the premise of this song in terms of what it was exploring. The title kind of says it in itself, in Nostalgia's Lie, but there was one line that I picked up on, which is, was it ever what I thought it truly was? And I don't know, I kind of related to that. Do you know when you look back at things or times or moments in life and you go, was it ever actually that good, or is it just nostalgia? I think this covered that topic pretty well, but then in terms of the instruments and what was going on, it was pretty one-dimensional. It didn't perk my ears up. The lyrics were great and the vocals were quite good, but the actual song was...
Weirdly, it felt like a Christmas track. And I don't know how to put this into words. Just when I was listening to it, something about it just felt like if there was Christmas lyrics on this track, I'd completely understand it. But let's not get our hopes down too much and keep our chin up with the next track.
Oh, that was actually a good one from you. I enjoyed that. This had a really calm intro, which then kind of kicked into the guitars, which weren't too energetic still, but I liked that. It was like a little, oh, boom, there we go. I think there was a lot more rhythm in the vocals in this, the kind of chorus sections where it was, Fender was kind of matching the guitars in moments and no. Do you know what I mean? I liked that, and I thought it switched it up a little bit while still flowing with the album quite well.
Yeah, it's quite a euphoric track, and I really like the build-ups with the orchestral strings used for emphasis throughout the track. I thought that was really cool. And yeah, decent track, very catchy.
I would say as well that this is probably the most indie feeling song on the entire record. I really don't know where Fender would fit into the kind of musical landscape when compared to a lot of other British bands, but this album really puts him away from just being an indie rock guy. He's more like a rock person. It's not even rock. I don't even know. Do you know what I mean though? Where does he fit? Because this isn't an typical indie rock album. There's a few elements of it, but it's really very different to that. But before I keep yapping, we'll go on to the next song, which is Wild Long Life.
Another track that felt quite, I want to say the word inspired. I don't want to say the word contrived, but it feels like something, again, that I've heard before. And at this point, I'm starting to wonder if these songs are just sounding like old Sam Fender songs, rather than it being like he's emulating somebody else's style. I think these are just the culmination of him waiting so long to release something that you feel like it sounds like something you heard before, but I think it's just because of the gap between this and his previous work.
I think that maybe you're feeling this way because these have been out for a couple months, so both of the songs you've said this for are two of the singles, and they have been played a hell of a lot across probably every gig you've been to. They might have been on before. You've probably seen them on TV or on online, Spotify or somewhere. So do you know what? Weirdly enough, I actually think that, and we'll come on to this as we get later into the album and further into the review, these singles are the worst songs. In terms of what I enjoyed, the singles are the most one-dimensional, boring, safe songs available. I think the first one, the title track, is decent, but this, for me, again, the lyrical content was quite good in moments if you really dived into that, but it was just a song that exists. It doesn't break any barriers. It's not particularly emotional or heart-wrenching or anything like some of the later songs are. I really wasn't a huge fan of this, or to be honest, I didn't mind Chin Up, but this kind of opening section of the album didn't do much for me. And we'll go on to Arm's Length, which is up next. Tim, give me your thoughts on that.
This feels like a Killers track through and through. I've noticed that Sam is slowly starting to sound more and more like Brendan Flowers, the frontman for the Killers. I feel like he's trying to emulate that style, and whilst I don't hate it, it is weird to know that he's from Newcastle in the UK, listening to the music output that he's got now. It's just so weird to hear a British artist sounding like this.
I suppose a lot of it, especially with many of the instruments that come in, the tambourines and the trumpets and stuff throughout the album, kind of comes back to Northern Soul a little bit as well. I've not listened to a huge amount of that, so I don't know how Americanized maybe that could sound in many ways. But for me, very similar vibes to the last song. Very one-dimensional, really wasn't my favourite. I think it was another one of the singles as well, if I remember correctly. And in this section, I couldn't help but think, live, these songs will be so boring. When you just stood there, I know not every song has to be super upbeat and jumping around or whatever, and you want some songs throughout a set list that are emotional, songs you've connected with, but for me, these don't fit into either of those boxes. They're just kind of there, and they were the singles, so they probably will be the ones that are picked to be played at shows, and there really wouldn't be my choices from this album.
Yeah, even though this is a shorter track, it still somehow feels like it lingers on for way too long, if you know what I mean. Even though I think it's only about a 3-minute 30 runtime, it still feels as long as the other tracks, but with less content. So it just feels very empty and vague. But let's move off that track anyway, onto Crumbling Empire, which has a slapping bass line.
Yeah, it does actually. And there was a cool little guitar solo for about the last 15 seconds of the song. I wish that we'd have heard some more of that throughout it. I actually think this had a little bit of a more funky feel when compared to the last couple songs. I enjoyed it. It stepped the tempo up a tiny bit, and I liked the content of it. Obviously, Crumbling Empire, talking about working class people being done dirty, etc., kids getting hooked on drugs. It was a very good song.
The ending of it, though, it just felt like what they used to do in the 70s and 80s, where they're like, can we come up with an ending for this song? No, let's just keep playing the same bit and just fucking fade it out. And I thought that was a bit lackluster. They could have ended it a bit better than that. I do feel like a fade out mid-album never works because it just doesn't transition into the next track. Then it just kind of goes, right, there's the end of that one, here's your next track. And I quite like the idea of songs playing into the next, but that's just a personal preference. And we'll move on to Little Bit Closer. Loved the use of the harmonica on this track. More music needs a harmonica in it.
I mean, to be honest, there was a lot going on in this. You had, as you mentioned, harmonica, there's some violins, there's some tambourines in here, a really cool bass line. I think that this stepped the tempo up a slight bit as well, which was definitely needed. I would say that, in my opinion, the biggest detriment to this album is that lack of tempo for the majority of it. I wanted more unique sounds, and I keep saying there's elements of these songs that are good, and there are, but there's none that made me go, wow, this is some new, fresh, unreal music. What did you think, though?
The drumming on it was particularly standout. There is quite a few tracks in this album where the drumming does have a good stance on it. It felt very American again, and I'm going to keep saying that, but this whole album feels very Americanized, and it's not really for me, that kind of style. But overall, did I think it was a great track? Not particularly. Didn't think it was terrible, just thought it was all right.
You could say that for a lot, though, couldn't you? But we'll go on to the next track, which is Rein Me In. For me, this is where the album really started to pick up a little bit. Admittedly, not in pace, but this was a real heartbreaker song, real storyteller, and I liked this a lot. I thought that for the next couple songs, we actually got Sam Fender's best lyrical writing and ability, songwriting, of his entire career.
Just drags on so much, this track. I was bored after about a minute in, I can't lie.
Were you actually listening to the lyrics and taking them in, though, or were you just kind of...
I was listening to the music. I don't think taking in the lyrical content is something that can be added to the enjoyment of music.
When it's a calm song like this that's meant to be focused on the lyrics, I think you kind of have to actually listen to them.
It was just boring, though, wasn't it? There was just nothing amazing going on. It was Sam Fender moaning about shit.
Nah, I really liked this. This was actually one of my favourite songs on the album. There was a really cool trumpet kind of comes in, makes it sound a little bit epic towards the end of it. But just throughout again, I'm going to say that very similar things for the last couple songs here. I thought that this was fantastic and really good songwriting.
Fair enough. Each to their own, I guess. But we move off that onto TV Dinner. And bro really does think he's American because that's called a ready meal. It's a TV dinner. That's such an Americanized thing to call it.
I'm more worried about how many times you've said American in this.
That's my main issue with this album is that we've got a British artist emulating American styles. And whilst that's not a problem, stay in your lane.
I would say for this song, though, this was the first time that it kind of had a different switch up completely in sounds, practically for the entire thing so far. It was needed. I liked it. It was a cool idea. And this, again, I think it puts it into a good run of tracks where it really started to pique my interest towards the end of the album, which is very rare.
Yeah, this one feels very different, and I quite like this one. I think this is probably my favorite track off the entire album. It feels kind of Kate Bushy in the way with it's like got minor resolutions over major chord progressions, and it has like an air of eeriness to it almost. But the vocals on this track are particularly stand out for me. I think he's delivered a stellar vocal performance on this one.
Is it just me, or did it kind of give you anxiety?
A little bit, yeah.
It built up that anxiety, and then again, similar to Rain Me In, which was the last track, it had a very cool ending again. It felt like it built up well towards the end. But now, Tim, we're on the second to last song, which is Something Heavy.
This is something a little bit different again. I kind of wish this variety was more injected into the first half of the album, because at this point I'm starting to think, this is actually, I'm liking each track. I'm liking the new elements that are being introduced. For the first 5 or 6 tracks, it's a bit of a snore fest.
Although weirdly, these last couple tracks kind of took the tone down another level, but I think because of the songwriting in there, this again was a really heart-wrenching storytelling track, and this is where Fender has really shone. And I think if you look back at his career, people loved what he was talking about on his first album. Maybe in his second album that dropped off a little bit. It was a lot longer as well, a lot more tracks. I do think he's recaptured that ability to put an idea out in a song and actually make you think about it with these last couple tracks. I really liked this one again. This was one of the songs in the album where I felt like I was fully engrossed and I was listening to every word that was being said, taking in every element of the song, whereas I didn't really have that effect in the first half. But we'll go on to the last song in the album, which is Remember My Name.
I'd love the use of instrumentation on this track. There's a lot of instruments going on. It's all layered really nicely, and the vocals are really nice too. And I do think this is a very good ending to the album. It puts a nice little hat on it. It goes, it was a lovely little track.
It was a weird song. It sounded to me like the type of song that would be used in a World War II film.
Like Dunkirk.
Yeah, like when they're going over the beaches or something, and you like seeing them all struggle. I liked it. I thought it felt like a bit more of a test to me, but it closed the album out nicely in a manner that kind of fit the rest of the flow as well. So on the album as a whole, Tim, I feel like you've not really enjoyed this, whereas if it was an American artist, you'd have been fine with it.
No, I don't even think I'd be fine with it then. I'm just not really into that style of music, unfortunately. But I will admit, there is a lot of catchy vocal melodies throughout this. I think Sam Fender excels at that, and having a lot of sing-songy, the kind of songs that if you saw live, everybody would be singing along to. I feel like he captures that very well. And I did catch myself singing like the last verse after a track because they're 5 or 6 minutes long. So you've heard that repeated 2 or 3 times. So when it comes to the final iteration, you're already on board to sing the melody. And yeah, I think Sam Fender is really good at that.
For me, it was missing that little bit of energy. There was lots of elements I enjoyed about this album. The songwriting was fantastic. The production and the vocal performance was really good, but it just really lacked 1 or 2 songs with a bit more tempo that I think this will be fantastic live, or this is one I want to listen to when I'm, upbeat. If I was feeling a little bit down or really wanted a relaxing project to put on, then this is a great option. But it missed that.
I think the mastering of everything on this album is superb. All the instruments, nothing gets muddied out. Everything is audible. But I do feel like what you're saying is correct. It felt like it dragged on. It felt like everything was dragged out longer than it needed to be. And it kind of felt like it overstayed its welcome somewhat. And I know that a lot of Sam Fender's fans will enjoy this style where they get a long piece of music that they can really dive into. But for me, it just felt it just overstayed its welcome.
I wouldn't say it felt dragged out. Maybe in the first half of the album, for me, this was very two halves. The first half, I didn't mind some of them. I think some of the first song we had, the title track was quite good, and then Chin Up was quite fun. Really, it all sounded like one big song to me. Whereas I think the second half, when it got a little bit more emotional, a little bit more story driven, I really enjoyed that. And I would actually say that 4-song run up to the last song, which was just kind of in its own world, was really good and kind of saved the album for me.
Would you agree that a lot of the tracks probably could have been cut down a little bit though? By like a minute or so.
I think some of them could be, but I wasn't offended by the length of any track. I'm not on your page where there was none where I was like, oh, I wish this had end.
I think it's about 2 or 3 of them for me where I was just thinking, okay, I get it now. I get the song. Can we move on to the next thing? I do feel like, in my opinion, it would be better if the album was the same length that it was, cut a couple of minutes off some of the tracks in the first half, and maybe add 1 or 2 more energetic tracks towards the middle end section.
But I also think that's maybe why you were hoping for some of them to end, because I've said there the first half felt like practically the same song, so you're just thinking, all right, can we get off of this vibe completely now? And I do understand that. And I think that live, a lot of these songs won't be quite as fun as Fender's older projects are when you see them and everyone's loving it, singing along and stuff. I mean, people will still be singing along. But I also think what I've seen online is everyone absolutely glazing the life out of this. And Fender is one of the biggest UK artists now. There's shouts for him to headline Glastonbury. He's headlined every other festival. But I think people have been too kind to this, to be honest. It's good in moments. I enjoyed a lot of it, and it's not an awful album, but I've seen people giving it 9.5 out of 10, 5 stars from loads of like reviewers and newspapers. I genuinely think if this was a smaller artist, it would not be getting those scores.
So let's find out what score you would give it. Out of 10, what would you rate this album?
I give it a 6.5 out of 10. It's two halves. I enjoyed the ending, but as in the last couple tracks, but it was too repetitive and the sounds explored were too repetitive. Not that I didn't enjoy some of it, and I did add a few songs to my playlist, but I think a 6.5 is about right.
For me, I'm coming in at a 5.5, and the reason for that is because half the album is good, half the album is throwaway for me, and there's not much more to it than that. I gave it an extra little boost over a 5 purely because there is a lot of catchy melodies throughout, and I will give him that. Like I've said many times, he's great at what he does. He can craft very catchy songs, but they linger. They stick around like a bad smell.
I do think a 5.5 slightly harsh. I think that it's better than that.
That you gave it a 6.5 because, admittedly, you are somewhat of a Sam Fender glazer.
Well, I'm not a glazer. I'm a fan. I've seen him many times.
Sam Fender.
I think his debut album was fantastic. I think he kind of went down a little bit with 17 Going Under. And then I think this is probably on a similar level. Maybe this is just... Debut albums are very hard to match sometimes. If an artist has a debut that blows up, you can see it with so many different artists. The Strokes, Arctic Monkeys, Linkin Park, loads. I think Fender might be one of those where his new music is still good, but will it ever be that next level great again?
Do you think it was worthy of the 3 album with the weight? You know, it's his 3rd album, and that's always an important album. Do you think the weight made this worthwhile, or do you think you were expecting a better project?
I just think that it wasn't particularly for me. I want more energy, a little bit more liveliness. I do think a lot of people will listen to this and really love every second of it. And maybe I've listened to this in full twice, which isn't a huge amount, but I think maybe upon re-listening to some of the songs, I might find a new appreciation for them. Whereas right now, it's just too slow.
But if you enjoyed this review, then be sure to like and subscribe. We cover all sorts of artists, all new albums from pretty much every genre we can think of. Anything new, anything old. We do the best of, the worst of certain artists. We do discography rankings, just everything music, basically.
Thank you.